Okay, there we go. Welcome again, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for today's frequently asked questions, or today's webinar on the Public Diplomacy Small Grants Program. We have a lot of information to go through today, so please, we are happy to answer a lot of your questions. We collected a lot of good questions in the registration form, and we'll go through as many of those as possible. Also, if we're listening to the program today and you have additional questions that aren't being answered, please do feel free to add it to the chat box. And after our presentation, we will try to get through as many of those questions as possible. I'll also display our email address as well for everyone, so that you'll be able to email us in case you have any other questions that aren't answered during the hour today. I'm here with a few of my colleagues, Monica, who will be giving a presentation to as well, and Peter, who will be assisting us with collecting your questions during the program. And with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. Oops, sorry. So for my part of the presentation today, I'll start by talking about what are grant programs, and I'll talk about our specific public diplomacy grant opportunities. I will go very detailed into what makes a good application, what is required when you're preparing your application. I will talk about eligibility, eligibility of what you need to have, who is eligible to apply, what type of activities are eligible. I'll talk about how to submit your proposal. I'll talk about how these proposals are then reviewed and selected. And before we get into the Q&A, my colleague Monica will have a presentation on the most common reasons that a proposal does not pass the technical review. And so I know we get a lot of great proposals that for one reason or another don't have everything as is required, and unfortunately don't make it to the panel. So we want to make sure that everyone listening in here today is able to avoid those common mistakes. So diving right in, what is a grant? A grant is basically a funding mechanism used by the government to be able to carry out activities in support of our own goals. It is different than a procurement. A procurement is something that we would use as the US government to carry out activities that directly benefit us. So that would directly benefit the personnel or directly benefit our own office. But a grant, on the other hand, we partner with an organization that will then implement the program, but they still be implementing a program that matches our goals as well as the US government. I work for the US State Department, which is one federal agency out of many agencies and programs that offer US government grants. I say that because I want to be sure that, so when I'm talking today about our grant program, I'm talking specifically about our State Department grants, and also even more specifically about public diplomacy grants. So you may hear different information other places. That doesn't mean one of us is wrong. There are many different agencies that also offer grant programs, and maybe what I'm saying today not everything I'm going to say today will apply to every single grant program. I also encourage you, in case you hear that from what you hear in today's session, that, oh, this grant program really isn't for me, it's not for my organization, I encourage you to look at all the array of grant opportunities that are available from the US government, and you might find one that does fit the program that you would like to carry out. I'll also quickly quickly on the grant life cycle. The grant it's a linear life cycle. So it sort of starts with the notice of funding, applications and proposals, review of those proposals, the award, and then the carrying out of those grant activities and closing the grant. So it has a very finite start and end. It is not a sort of a circle. It does end, and sort of today's program, we're talking about this one specific grant opportunity. And talking about types of grants, so there's different ways that we are able to award a grant. And the different mechanisms that we use, the different sort of award provisions that we use to award these grants, then have an effect on how those grants are then implemented in the relationship between us, the grantor, and the grantee. As a fixed amount award, these are generally for smaller awards that have no large variable costs. That is because we are this fixed amount award, in case there are sort of changes in the program or changes in the cost of doing that program, we are unable to amend that to change the cost. So any fixed amount award are usually for sort of grants that have very specific known costs that are not likely to change. Second is just a sort of general grant. And this is what we mostly use for this program. And this is how this is sort of, like I mentioned before, how we generally are able to grant money to an organization. And we work with the organization in the pre-award phase in order to develop the sort of terms and conditions and the award provisions that that work best for both organizations, for both the organization and the US government. And then third, the cooperative agreement is the same as a grant, only in those award provisions, it is specified exactly how the US government, what our role will be in the grant. So it gives the US government a little bit more control over certain areas of the grant. And that would be determined in the award provisions, depending on what that program is. And now diving in more specifically on public diplomacy grants. So as I mentioned, I will be talking about sort of State Department grants, but also this specific program is public diplomacy grants, the public diplomacy small grants. And the focus is really on the connections between the United States and Kenya, connecting Kenyans to Americans, helping explain US policy to the Kenyan public, helping connect experts from Kenya with experts in the United States, the exchange of information, the exchange of culture. And it often will involve both Americans and Kenyans participating. And I think one of the most important things that you will get out of this presentation, hopefully, is that the grant proposals for this grant program must contain American content. And American content, what that can mean a lot of different things. It could be that you have expert speakers from the United States coming to Kenya or talking to Kenyans. You could have sort of collaboration between Americans and Kenyans in the arts or in academia or in different areas. Or it could be working with our American spaces. So we have a network of 5 American spaces across Kenya. We have American corners in Lamu, in Mombasa, in Nakuru, and in Nairobi, and another American center attached to the US Embassy. And that sort of having activities at those American spaces provides that US content. It could also be working with Kenyan alumni of US government exchange programs. So we have many exchange programs that send Kenyans to the United States for anything from sort of connecting with other experts and professionals or youth leadership. And by leveraging that experience of Kenyans who have participated in those US government sponsored exchange programs, that can also provide US content to your grant proposal. For this grant, for this notice of funding opportunity, we are looking for your good ideas. Oftentimes, in other notices of funding opportunity, we will be very specific on the type of program or the type of proposal that we're looking for, or exactly what objectives we are looking to achieve. And so in those cases, we're often, we have an idea of our own and we're looking for a partner to help implement. However, in this instance, in the instance of these small grant program, it is an annual program statement. And so we have put sort of our 5 very broad areas that we are working in, that the embassy as a whole are 5 areas that we are working in that we are looking for, we know that a lot of organizations are out there doing great work in those same 5 areas. And we're looking for you, those organizations and individuals that are working in those areas, to come to us with your ideas on how we can partner and achieve and achieve these shared goals that we have. And so I'll just go quickly with those 5 areas they're on this screen right now. But the first one broadly is reinforce US-Kenyan shared values. And that is quite broad. It includes cultural exchanges, it includes sort of professional, bringing together professionals and looking at the arts. The second one, advance regional and global security, partnering with Kenyans to create a more stable and a peaceful, prosperous place. Third would be economic prosperity. And so looking at sort of our shared values of entrepreneurship and promoting a place that economic prosperity can thrive, and also looking at the trade between Kenya and the United States and increasing trade, promoting rule of law, democracy, and respect for individual liberty is the fourth one. And fifth, promoting health cooperation, looking at how the US and Kenya can work together to create a healthier Kenya. We always post all of our funding opportunities on our website and on grants.gov, and we'll often also post our funding opportunities on social media. So when we do have other notices of funding opportunities, please look there. Grants.gov is also where you can find any funding opportunities from any US government agency posted. So not only our own public diplomacy grants, but also grants from other agencies such as the US Agency for International Development, or CDC, and all of those. So like I said, today we'll be talking specifically about the Small Grants Program, the annual program statement. But please do take a look at everything that we have. I will mention for everyone, this is a very common question. If you haven't already looked, I really encourage you to go onto grants.gov and download the notice of funding opportunity that we're talking about today. It goes into all the specifics about what is required and the deadlines. So for the deadline for this grant program is June 30th. So you must have your proposal in by June 30th of this year. It does say it's a rolling application, sort of rolling acceptance, and we have already had 2 grant panels. This has been open since January 1st. We've already had 2 grant panels. And so this will be the final time that the grant panel will meet. So after, so anybody that's listening now, if you haven't submitted a proposal, please do so as soon as possible, so that we'll make it for the last and final grant panel. After June 30th, the notice will close, and then please just stay tuned until we are able to post next year's notices of funding opportunity, which may or may not be similar to this one. So yes, you'll have to, next year, if after this one closes, you'll have to look for different funding opportunities that are posted throughout the year. And so now I'll start just talking about how to prepare an application. And I'll go in through every single section that is required in your application. And then we'll talk about how to submit in the other parts of the program. So very generally, all proposals must have the narrative portion. They must include a budget, and they also must include a budget narrative. You also must submit your SF424 forms. Those forms are available on grants.gov. You can find them by searching for SF424. And depending on if you're applying as an individual or an organization, depends on which of those forms you will need to fill out. And so starting just with the narrative proposal, overall your narrative proposal, please, this is where you're able to give us your great idea. And it should be succinct, to the point, and it should be very clear and without any jargon. So I believe there is a 5-page limit on the length of your proposal, and that may seem short, but is actually plenty enough for you to be able to talk about what your program is and how you will achieve the goals. You should include all of the necessary information in that so that we'll be able to understand what exactly you are planning on doing for your program. And it should very clearly tie your organization or your program's stated goals and objectives to our own objectives. So those 5 for priority areas that we had. So it should be very clear to us how your proposal is connected to the stated objectives that we also want to achieve. We should have that strong overlap. The proposal, the narrative has many sections, and I'll go in basically through every section that will be in your narrative, starting with the summary. So this, encapsulates everything. It should be, it doesn't encapsulate everything. It should have a summary of all the most important parts of your proposal. It should have that strong idea, and reading just the proposal, reading just the summary, I should be able to understand exactly what the great idea is, and just hit me with like the who, what, when, where, how, and why. There's a section for your organization description, and in this section, we do want to hear all about what your organization has, how your organization is the most qualified to carry out this program. You can talk about your past achievements, past programs that you've implemented, if you have ever received funding from, or if you ever managed a grant before, please include that, especially if you've received funding from the US government, please do include that. However, a lot of questions, we often get the question, can a new organization apply? And a new organization is eligible to apply for a grant. And we just want to understand in this section, even if you're a new organization, you can still be perfectly qualified to be able to carry out the program. And it's important in this section then that you explain exactly how your new organization is able to carry out this activity. Also to note, only one organization can be the main recipient. There's another section in the proposal where you can talk about your program partners, and you're definitely able to partner with other organizations to carry out your activities, but only one organization can be the main recipient. The next section is a problem statement. So very clearly describe what the problem is, and that problem should be very closely related, or it should be tied to the problem and so the objectives that we've also stated in the notice of funding opportunity. Next, your program objectives and activities. If you have heard of SMART goals, they should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. We want to know that you'll be able, the goal that you've set is something that you'll be able to achieve, you'll be able to measure it and be able to show the success that you've had in achieving that goal. And it should be, of course, directly related to the problem and again, to the objectives that we have. Also, I want to mention on defined participants. So if you've already read our notice of funding opportunity, there is sort of priority audiences listed there, and they're very broad categories of audiences. For your proposal, I really encourage you to clearly define who your audience is and why that audience will be the best suited audience to be able to achieve your goal. So why is that audience directly related to achieving those program objectives? So defining your audience, you also might want to include sort of how you might be recruiting, what you're considering in terms of the location, age, demographic, all sorts of ideas, and do be sort of mindful of including all sort of diverse representation of Kenyans, but also keeping in mind how that specific audience will help achieve your stated goal. Next, in program design and timeline, I'll mention on this section that there isn't a sort of formula or a required format that we need to see this design and timeline in. However, depending on your project, makes the most sense in order to get across the information as clearly and easily as possible. But in this section, you will want to talk about how your activities will be laid out over the course of the period of performance, and include sort of who will be involved, which program partners, which staff will be involved, which audiences will be, or participants will be involved of each section, and how and when you expect to reach those milestones of different as you near completion of your proposal or of your program. Key personnel, also important here, please do attach the CVs, the resumes of those key personnel who will be working on this program. And these are the people who are either your direct employees of your organization. If you're applying as an individual, it would be yourself, or any other people, individuals that will be working with you, or any other program partners that will be working with you and their key personnel. It should be clear in this part, sort of bring out or highlight the achievements and the qualifications of those key personnel that are directly relevant to this program. And it's okay, I think, so the third bullet point, if it is a new position, so if in the fact that you would hire somebody if you were awarded this funding, it's okay to describe exactly sort of what the job description or list of duties would be, even if you don't have someone yet in that position. But we would need to know at least like what the requirements would be for that person to be hired. And here in project partners, this is where you're able to include any other organizations that you may be working with in order to carry out your activities. And for this one as well, you need to attach letters of commitment. So it's very important that any project partners that you will plan to be working with for this program, that you have received their commitment in advance of your applying. So you can't wait until after you've been awarded the grant in order to ask them whether they'd be willing to work with you, especially if you're counting on them to carry out part of your program. And they must also have their own separate budget. So when we get into budget, I'll go through sort of what the budget categories are. But so that funds will go under contractual, but they also, especially if it's sort of they're carrying out a large portion of the program, must have their own separate budget of exactly what they will be doing. And it is your responsibility to monitor their work, and their work is in complete compliance with all of the award provisions and the standard terms and conditions and all of the US government regulations that govern grants. So we will monitor the main recipient, but the main recipient must be responsible for monitoring all sub-recipients. Just a quick note on for-profit entities. You can, contract a for-profit venue where you're going to be hosting something, or if you need to rent PA equipment or rent a tent or something, that is fine. You're able to add that under contractual as sort of you're contracting a for-profit entity. That is acceptable. However, if you are, you cannot rely on a for-profit entity to carry out portions of the program. So you cannot have as your main project partners any for-profit entities. And I'll get into as well sort of the requirements and eligibility of what organizations are eligible to be granted money or granted these grants. And then monitoring and evaluation, you must include in your timeline, in your budget, in your proposal, how you will be able to monitor your progress and your success, and also build in time to evaluate whether you've met those objectives. So please do include that in your budget and is part of the sort of forethought. You think about monitoring and evaluation up front and include that. Then finally, sustainability. So as I mentioned, this sort of grant it's a linear cycle, it's a linear timeline. It's not circular. So once the grant period ends, what we want in this section is to know exactly sort of what will be the after effects of the program. And it should not be reliant on additional funding from the US government. So you can talk about, but it also does not need to rely on your organization's continued expenditure effort. For instance, you can be talking about how the participants who were in the part of the program are then going to impact others in their community. So thinking about that multiplier effect, how will this program sort of grow beyond its own period of performance, and how it will continue to affect the community and continue to achieve some of those goals, even if they are after the program period, or even if it's sort of without any additional US government funding. So that concluded sort of like the narrative portion of the proposal. Now I'll talk about the budget for the proposal and what's required in the budget. This is divided up by how the form is required on the SF 424. And so I'll talk about how to classify each of these budget categories. First, in personnel, these are the personnel that are working directly for your organization, or if you're individuals, sort of your own salary. It should be calculated as a level of effort. So it doesn't mean, so very, very likely you will not have a person that is paid at full salary for 12 months, 100% effort for the entire grant period. Most likely your organization will have many different programs or activities, and this grant might be one of them. And so people working at your organization will likely spend only a percentage of their time dedicated to this program. And so you need to calculate then what exact percentage of the time that they would be spending working on this program, and then calculate as a percentage of their salary and how long they will be working on this program. Generally, fringe benefits, and that's something like health insurance, are generally not included because this is a small grant. And so we're not expecting that a small grant would be funding sort of the entire operations of an organization. This would just be sort of like a small percentage of your operations. So we generally would not include fringe benefits in your budget for these small grant programs. Travel includes anything from airfare, meals and incidentals, visa fees, inoculations that are required. And so that would also, in today's world, include your required COVID-19 test before you leave, or travel insurance, supplies. And so this is all sorts of materials, spanners, paper, or small equipment. And small equipment can be sort of like small electronics. Maybe it could include, I know this question comes up, it could include like a camera, or it could include a laptop. But generally, so yeah, those are the supplies that we would include there. Equipment, on the other hand, is not included. So we are not going to be funding any large machinery. We won't be funding any sort of buildings or anything quite expensive, especially for these small grants. We expect that sort of if you need like a whole setup of an office space, that you have your own office space already, that you're not relying on this small grant to purchase office equipment in sort of large quantities. Like I said, supplies will be able to cover sort of like a laptop or a camera that might be used specifically for this grant, but not sort of in large quantities. Contractual, this is where you can put your program partners or your subgrantees or any other vendors or rentals. And if you do have a subgrantee or those program partners, they also required a separate detailed budget that also includes all these same budget categories. Other direct costs could include sort of honoraria for speakers, printing costs, and then indirect costs. And so that's sort of like your overhead, keeping the lights on in your office. There's a few different options for how to calculate this. One, oftentimes because these are small grants, and they could be cost shared, meaning that your organization will sort of pay for their own overhead costs. It can also be calculated as a 10% de minimis, and that means it will be calculated as 10% of modified total direct costs. So you need to calculate the total direct costs, except for a few direct costs. So it gets a little complicated, but it would be a calculation of the modified total direct costs and 10% of that, sort of like a flat fee. And then if your organization has a NICRA, which is a negotiated indirect cost rate agreement, then we can also go by the negotiated NICRA. Most organizations do not have a negotiated NICRA unless you have many grants with the US government. And so if you're like, what is a NICRA? And then you probably do not have a NICRA, and you don't have to worry about that. And then finally, cost share is not required. However, it would be viewed favorably in the grants review, but it is definitely not required. And we recognize that smaller organizations may not be able to afford the same level of cost share. And so it's definitely just it is a consideration that we take into account. For the budget, do provide as much detail as possible, as realistic as possible for your budget. There are a few restrictions. We cannot fund any travel to the United States. So one thing I hadn't mentioned yet, but all grant activities must take place in Kenya. So yes, we want to bring together Americans and Kenyans, but this grant program does not fund for Kenyans to travel to the United States, but we can fund for Americans or for people to travel from the United States to Kenya. We cannot fund any salary costs that do not directly support the project. So like I mentioned before, if you have someone working on the project, if it's only a percentage of their time, it must be calculated as a percentage of their time. We can't pay for their entire salary if they're going to be not going to be spending all of their time working on the project. You cannot fund office equipment. We also cannot pay to complete activities that have begun with other funds. And so this means, if you started a program and you've already had another grant that the other grant has sort of, funded these programs, but you weren't able to finish the programs under the previous grant or through whatever previous funds that you had, we cannot provide a grant to then sort of complete those activities. If you have an organization and you're doing sort of constant work in one area and you want to start a new program, we can do that with us with a grant. But if the program has already started and we can't fund basically any activities that have already sort of been funded or started. Refreshments, most cases we cannot fund refreshments. The exceptions are if it's sort of required for the participants or the audience to be able to attend. For instance, if you have an all-day conference, we can't pay for lunch. Or if we have if people wouldn't be able to go out and get their own lunch, or just as impractical, or people wouldn't come if there wasn't lunch provided, then we are able to fund that. But in other cases, we generally no. And alcohol, and we cannot fund any alcohol in any case. The general rule for whether for your budget is it reasonable? Does it make sense? Is it allowable? Sort of, is it something that is not disallowed? And then allocable, meaning do we have the funds for it? And also on that, all these grants are subject to funding availability. And so not we cannot guarantee the funding until those award terms and conditions, the award provisions are signed, and that we've had the sign off from various people on the availability of those funds. And so even if we reach out to you saying that the grant panel has selected your proposal to you're selected your proposal to then continue on to negotiations and possibly for funding, that does not mean you can start any activities. And any grantee should not start any activities until the confirmation is given that the funds are available and that they are allocated to that specific program. And so onto eligibility. So who is eligible to apply for this grant program? Nonprofit organizations, which includes think tanks, civil society organizations, community-based organizations. And essentially for this, if your organization is able to register a bank account, is registered with the government of Kenya, and is able to have a bank account in the organization's name, and your organization does not have profit, it's not for-profit organization, then likely you will be considered under non-for-profit organization. I know we get a lot of questions because people think that they have to register as an NGO in order to receive funding, and that's not the case. We are able to fund community-based organizations and other organizations as long as they have registered themselves. We are able to fund individuals, or individuals are able to apply. And I would just though mention, if you are an individual and you intend to apply as an individual, please do mention, or please include in your proposal sort of how you are qualified, or why you are qualified as an individual rather than as an organization to carry out the program. So why is it, are you better suited as an individual to carry out this program rather than having within the structure of an organization? And I'll just mention again too that for the budget, we can't fund large equipment for this grant, and so the individual applying wouldn't be able to sort of like create an office out of this, but we may be able to fund sort of small office supplies. Educational institutions and government institutions are also eligible, and educational excluding for-profit educational institutions. We cannot fund, and on the other side of the list, we can't fund any partisan political activities or lobbying. We can't fund any construction of any sort of structures or buildings. We cannot fund charitable or development activities. And I do want to highlight this development activities, since this also comes up a lot. As I mentioned at the beginning, these are public diplomacy grants, and the main purpose of these are to connect Americans and Kenyans, and also to support sort of our shared goals in Kenya, the shared goals between that the United States government and the American people have, and as well as that Kenyans have. So those sort of ideals of mutual security, health cooperation, economic prosperity. And so we cannot fund development activities. And there are a few other good reasons why. One is the U.S. Agency for International Development has many grant opportunities. They invest millions of dollars in Kenya every year. And so they are much better poised to be able to carry out sustainable development. And this small grant program with the cap of $50,000 and a maximum period of performance of 12 months. If any of you are working in sustainable development, you probably are aware that with those caps, sustainable development can't really occur. So that's why we're much more focused on, for this grant program specifically, creating those networks and creating the cooperation between the United States and Kenya. We can't fund specific religious activities. we can't do anything that involves fundraising. So we can't contribute to sort of campaigns to build up funds for your organization. We won't, we cannot fund specific academic research. So we can't fund your PhD thesis, unfortunately, and we can't fund sort of your participation in a conference. We can't fund initiatives that duplicate existing programs. And I mentioned this before, activities that occur in the United States, all activities must occur in Kenya. We cannot fund scholarships for tuition assistance. I'll give a plug for Education USA, who will help you find those scholarships, and especially if you're planning on studying in the United States. But yeah, we cannot fund sort of school fees, and commercial or for-profit endeavors, including venture capital, seed funding, angel investment. And so this is important, you know, even if you're a nonprofit organization and let's say you want to have a business competition, it's very common that for the business plan competition, you want to be able to have seed funding at the end for the winners. Unfortunately, we cannot use grant money for these grant funds for that seed funding or that venture capital. What you can do though is possibly purchase sort of a prize, something that might be helpful for that or that company to get off the ground. But you cannot fund sort of like a lump sum of money for for-profit endeavors. And similar to that, prizes and competition awards, we can in certain instances, you know, we can purchase the prize with the grant money, but we can't give sort of cash prizes. Submission, you must submit your completed application to Nairobi grants at state.gov. I know that some other agencies may collect proposals or applications through the grants.gov website. In this instance, the only way to submit an application for it to be considered is by emailing it to Nairobi grants at state.gov. You must require all your required documents, and organizations, this is the important part, organizations must have a DUNS number, an NCAGE code, and a valid registration on sam.gov prior to submitting an application. Please, if you do not yet have those, the DUNS, NCAGE, and sam.gov registration, start immediately in order to be able to submit your application on time. This is, I think Monica will get into this shortly, but it is definitely one of the reasons that organizations aren't able to pass the technical review. It does take time, so start early. And on that, we understand it's hard, it's difficult. We cannot, unfortunately, we cannot do it for you. It is completely free, and at no point should you be asked for money. If someone asks you money to as part of the process, it is a scam. Please be aware that there are scams out there. Do not pay for any part of this application process. Throughout this entire grant application process, there should be, you will not be asked for money at any point. And pay attention to details as you register, because for your sam.gov and NCAGE DUNS, because one of the most common reasons that people aren't able to get their registration is because one sort of period was turned into a comma and the addresses don't match, or something doesn't match in your information. So please be careful that all the information you put into those forms are accurate and they match. And so after you've submitted your proposal, as I mentioned, we've already had 2 grant panels, and the final grant panel will meet after all of the grant applications have been submitted by June 30th. The first review will be a technical eligibility review. And so Monica will talk about that after I've finished, about why, or the most common reasons why proposals do not pass that technical review. After that, all technically eligible proposals will be sent to the grant panel. And this is comprised of usually 5 or 7 people who will then review all of the grant proposals. They will score them, and then they will discuss them. And they will usually make a recommendation on which proposals they would recommend for funding. And then that recommendation will go to embassy leadership, who will then also have to review all of the proposals and the grant panel recommendation and either say yes or no on the decisions. And then after that, it will go back to the organization actually. So grants officer representative will be designated from the embassy. So an embassy staff will be designated as the grants officer representative. They will contact the organization that or individual who has applied for the grant and say that the grant panel has reviewed your proposal favorably, and that begins the sort of the phase of sort of working together with the embassy and the organization to sort of sort out any comments that the grant panel may have had. Many times the grant panel will say, we like this, but, and have some qualifications that need to be addressed. And then once the sort of the organization and the embassy have come together to create the award. So I think sometimes we call this phase like the co-creation phase, since we're working together to create this award. We will draft up the award conditions, the award provisions, and then it will then require approval from Washington, D.C., from headquarters to then approve that grant. So there are many steps along the way before there is the final approval and signatures to begin the grant, their period of performance. Once we have the approval, the grant rules and regulations are all will be discussed between the grants officer, the grants officer representative, and the grantee organization. The grant must abide by the rules within the DS 1909, which is sort of the signed agreement, the award provisions, which were created during that co-creation phase, the State Department terms and conditions, which are applicable to all State Department grants, and then the US Federal Code of Regulations, and that's sort of pertaining to all US government grants. And then finally, any other sort of negotiations or agreements between the grantee and the grants officer representative that were made during that co-creation phase. And that was quite a bit, I will admit. I will now turn it over, before we get into questions, I will now turn it over to my colleague, Monica. So I'm gonna stop sharing and turn it for her presentation. Take it away, Monica. Let's see, you're on mute. Let's see, Monica, you're still on mute. Are you speaking? Are you? Oh, I can ask you to unmute. There
Yes.
There you are. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, there you go. Go ahead, take it away.
Okay, just 1 second. Okay, good evening and nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. My name is Monica Munyori, and I'm going to take you through a short presentation. Let me share it with you. I'm going to take you through a short presentation. And my presentation is on the main reasons why proposals do not pass the technical review. What we have realized is that we receive a lot
Monica,
of very, yes.
Sorry, quickly, just do you mind going into presentation mode? I think if you click, yeah. If you go to view, maybe, or.
I'm trying to, but it's actually not.
Okay, that's fine. I think that should be fine. I think you should be able to see it still. Okay,
I hope
go
they
ahead.
can see.
Sorry for interrupting.
No problem, no problem. I think you lost me again, sorry.
We can hear you. We can hear you and see you. Go ahead.
Okay, the main reasons I'm actually looking by presentation. I've lost my presentation. Sorry, that's why I'm sorry. Let me just do this again. 1 second. Okay, I'm sorry for that. I'm going to take you through a short presentation on the main reasons why proposals do not pass the technical review. We have realized that we receive a lot of very good proposals, but most of them do not go through past the initial stage, which the stage we are calling the technical review. What is a technical review? This is the initial screening of application documents. We screen these documents to ensure that they are complete and that they meet the program's eligibility requirements as outlined in the funding announcement. As my colleague Devin has mentioned, we already have a funding announcement that we have been receiving proposals on a rolling basis, and you can find it on grants.gov. So this is where we have the requirements that are outlined, and that's what we actually look for in the technical review. I would like you to note that if your application does not meet all the basic requirements, it will be rejected at this stage because of being technically ineligible. And therefore, it will actually not be considered by the merit review panel. So it's very, very important that you keenly listen to the short presentation so that you can actually make sure you meet these requirements. One of the reasons is the legal eligibility. Before beginning the application process, make sure you or your organization, or if you're applying as an individual, that you make sure you check the requirements in the funding opportunity and find out who is being what is the criteria. When considering legal eligibility, the first step is to know what type of organization you represent or whether you're applying as an individual. Then you actually check the eligibility requirements in the funding announcement. What you need to check is, are you a not-for-profit organization? Are you an NGO? Are you an education organization? Are you a government organization? Are you a for-profit organization? And as my colleague has mentioned, we do not fund, in this small grants program, we do not fund for-profit entities. Then we move on with the legal eligibility. For legal eligibility requirements, again, read carefully the application instructions that are attached to every funding announcement on grants.gov. And these instructions are actually summarized in the synopsis details in the section of the announcement in grants.gov. If you're not legally eligible for a specific funding opportunity, you would actually waste a lot of time, as I mentioned at the beginning, completing the application process, and when you cannot actually be considered for funding. Please note that every funding announcement or opportunity, the legal eligibility differs. So even if you've applied grants with us in the past, or we have different, or for example, if we have different funding announcements that we have posted, kindly check carefully the eligibility because it may differ in the different announcements. Okay. The next reason, the second reason why your application might not pass the technical review is inactive or missing registration in the system for award management. That's what we call SAM. Please note that organizations applying for grants, except individuals, must obtain the following registrations prior to submitting their proposals. This is prior to submitting the proposal. You need a unique entity identifier, or what we call a dance number. You need an NCAGE code, and you need an active registration on sam.gov. What you need to do is, you apply for dance and engage, and then you proceed to register your organization on grants.gov. And this is the link. Actually, we will share this presentation later so that you can be able to see the link where you need to go and apply for either SAM or dance or engage. What we need to note is that registration is free of charge, and you do not actually need to, pay anything to get into to apply for to register your organization in the system for award management. There's no cost at all. Please watch out for scams because there are many, and some people have actually been made to pay for registration. Again, full registration process takes several steps, and it can actually take weeks. And this may take a long time. So applicants are actually advised to start the registration process very early. So if you'd actually like to apply for our grants to the current funding announcement, kindly start the registration process now. Information on dance and engage registrations must match. Please note this information, whichever information you use for the registration of dance and engage must match exactly, or else you will encounter errors while registering in the system for award management. Please note, for example, if your organization, maybe you've said you are registering and you have put PO box with the P.O.box, you have actually to use the same when you are applying for engage and when you move to a system for award management. And this actually goes down to the commas or any full stops that you might use. So make sure that information is matching. Registration is only for organizations, again, and individuals are not required to apply. And as when you apply and you get your registration, your organization is registered in the system for award management. Please note that you have to renew your registration annually. And again, dance and engage applications can be completed simultaneously. So you do not have to wait to get the dance number for you to continue to apply for engage. You can complete those applications simultaneously. Okay, the third reason is incomplete application package. In order to be considered for funding, the applicant must submit a proposal, a detailed budget in dollars, please note, and a budget narrative. All these documents actually must be in English. Details on what should be included in these three documents are clearly outlined in the funding announcement. And again, my colleague actually has, Devin has actually gone through most of those documents on what it is, how the proposal, the budget narrative, the budget, the information that should be included. And again, I'll continue and say that this information can vary actually in different funding announcements. So make sure you actually check each funding announcement when you receive it. The fourth reason why your proposal might not pass the technical review is submitting more than one proposal. Please note that applicants are only allowed to submit one proposal per organization or individual. If we receive more than one proposal from the same organization or individual, we will actually consider that organization or individual ineligible for funding. Please do not submit more than one proposal. If you have very many good ideas, just please select the best of them and submit that to us. The last reason is missing required application form. The applicant must submit the mandatory application form. We have mentioned in the funding opportunity that organizations have to submit the SF-424. And this is application for federal assistance. This is for organizations, individuals, SF-424I. And we have these forms on grants.gov. If you go to the related documents section on grants.gov, you will see these forms. And just in case you are unable to download these forms, which many people actually sometimes are unable to do so, kindly send us an email at our email address is nairobigrants@state.gov, and we'll be able to send you that form. Okay, we've talked about the dance number. And again, the dance, we've mentioned that for you to be able to register in the system for award management, that is SAM, you need a dance number. And actually, as you know, this is just a definition that it's a unique 9-digit identification number. And for you to be able to apply for grants, you actually have to have a dance number. So it's a dance number, an NCAGE code. Please note, NCAGE code is for all foreign entities. There is a CAGE code for domestic entities. Those are US, the organization, the US-based organizations, and you have the foreign entities which are supposed to apply for an NCAGE code. People are asking for resources on information on where to apply for dance. We have the link there to the web form. We also have a form, a link to the NCAGE code. And what I can also tell you that there are also a lot of resources on grants.gov. There are also even videos explaining how you can apply for a dance number, how you can get an NCAGE code, and actually instructions on how you can register your entity on system for award management. So do not forget those 5 main reasons that I've mentioned, because that's what will determine if your proposal will get to the review panel. And that's all for me, and I'll take it back to Devin. Back to you, Devin.
Great, thank you very much, Monica. So I know there's been a lot of questions that have been coming in. Thank you to Peter and Monica who have been answering some of those as they go along in the chat. I know we're already past 5, but if you would like to stay on, happy to, oh wait, sorry, one second. Happy to, oh, sorry, one second. Monica, do you mind unsharing your screen so we can change the view? Monica, there we go. Okay. So, sorry, as I was saying, if you're happy to stay on, I'm happy to answer some of the questions. I know that we had a lot of questions that came in through the registration, and I will go through a few of those that I think maybe we could touch on, either haven't been touched on, or we could touch on a little bit more during this portion. And so starting with one question that came in about eligible organizations. So we did go through the eligibility, but so one question was about groups of individuals. Can groups of individuals apply? And so for that, what you would need to do is only one individual would apply as the main recipient of the grant. And then you would be working with other individuals. So that gets a little tricky there. And that's one instance when it may be better to be working as an organization rather than as one individual. I see a lot of people asking to share their presentations via email. And yes, we can. We will be sending out sort of a recording of today's program, and we can send out those sort of links of additional resources that we had there as well to everyone who registered. Another person asked, can an American organization apply and implement in partnership with a Kenyan organization? And definitely, we definitely encourage that is definitely a possibility. And is one way of sort of bringing Kenyans and Americans together. Another person asked about if individuals must have that NCAGE DUNS code, and no. So individuals are not required to have the DUNS NCAGE registration. And another question came in about an individual applying. If you have to hire staff, won't you be considered paying their salaries in full, since they'll be full-time in the office? So for your personnel salaries, if you are indeed sort of hiring someone to work full-time and they're 100% of their time dedicated to this grant program, so the grant program that you're applying for, then yes, in that instance, they are eligible to receive sort of 100% of their funding from this grant money. But if they spend any percentage of their time on any other work that is not related to this grant, then that must be calculated as sort of a percentage of their time rather than 100% of their time. Continuation of funding after 1 year. So the period of performance for these grants, there's a limit of 12 months. The period of performance cannot exceed 12 months. It can be a great deal shorter. So you could have a month-long period of performance if you're just gonna do sort of like one program or like one sort of day event. But after 1 year, sort of the grant period ends and the continuation of funding, there's no expectation that we'll be able to continue funding any of these programs after 1 year. It depends on how the embassy decides to implement its funding, or next year, it's possible that there will be another annual program statement. It might be different priority areas. There also might be no annual program statement, but instead very specific notices of funding opportunity. But it really just depends on next year. So I don't want to sort of hypothesize what it could be. The limit for for each grant would be $50,000. However, sort of the average grant can be anywhere below that, sort of 15 to 25,000. So please don't expect that you must submit a budget of 50,000. Please do submit a realistic budget, and the budget should really match the program activities that you intend to carry out. So it doesn't have to be anywhere near 50,000, it can be smaller than that as well. And then I think, payment schedule. Someone asked about the payment schedule. So after the grant is awarded, there's a way for the grantee to submit a request for either reimbursement or for an advance for their program activities. And that sort of schedule of funding is dependent on your own organization and your own program. So if you have a year-long program and you have sort of large milestone events at certain areas when you'll need a certain advance of funding, or at different times when you'll need reimbursement, that depends on sort of the organization and their own policies and processes. And let's see, I think that covers most of the questions I saw come through. I want to thank everyone again for, activities focus only in Kenya. Yes, okay, so actually that's a very good question. Activities should occur in Kenya. Virtual activities can occur. So if you have a virtual program, however, I see, so the question is sort of cross-border engagement within East Africa. Your target participants and your target audience must be all in Kenya. I know there are other grant opportunities out there for regional engagement across East Africa and working with other partners, other countries. But for this specific program, the audience must be Kenyans. It must be in Kenya. And you can't have sort of like virtual programming from the United States to Kenya, but the target area is Kenya for this grant program. I also want to mention, I know this is, as people are dropping off, I want to also mention that this grant, since we know it's COVID time, when we sign the grant, we expect that it would continue regardless of any different health, that the grant program activities will be able to continue whether or not there is travel restrictions or other health restrictions. And so that you should really include the sort of planning in advance for possible restrictions due to the pandemic when you're planning your activities. And you may need to have sort of backup options that are virtual in order to carry out your activities. And with that, Monica, Peter, anything else I need to cover before we leave?
This is Monica Devin. There's a question on social enterprises. If registered as a social enterprise, they can apply for grant.
Sure. For a social enterprise, if it is for profit, even if you have, as I understand, a social enterprise is for profit, but you do have sort of a component of your giving back to the community or developing the community. If it is for profit, unfortunately, we cannot fund or we cannot give a grant to that organization. If we are able to give a grant sort of if there's a for-profit company that then has a branch that is sort of affiliated organization that is a nonprofit, sort of, if you think of some large corporations that then have their partner foundation that's a nonprofit, where we are able to grant to those organizations, but we cannot grant to the for-profit entity.
Devin, if you can mention again the proposal submission deadline and where to submit the proposals to. I've seen several questions.
Yes, that is very important. So June 30th, coming up quickly. June 30th is the proposal submission deadline for this notice of funding opportunity. Send your proposals to nairobigrants@state.gov. And that is the one way to submit proposals. So Nairobi grants, it's state.gov is where you submit your completed applications. Anything else we missed?
Even do individuals need a dance number for to get a grant?
No, individuals do not need a DUNS number. So only organizations are required to have those registrations. Individuals do not need those registrations. Thanks, Peter. Okay. Monica, Peter, anything else you want to say? Okay, well, with that,
that's all for me.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all. And thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We look forward to seeing your proposals. Email us any other questions at nairobigrants@state.gov. Thank you and have a good evening. Bye.